Right before we jump into this video, you're probably watching it because you own some camera gear. Well, how do you keep track of all the gear that you own and protect it? Well, I created a free app called My Gear Vault that you can download right now for Android and iOS at mygearvault.com. Jared Polin, FroKnowsPhoto.com, and this is a side-by-side comparison, aka a versus video, between the Nikon Z6, the Nikon D500, and the Nikon D750. As you can tell, this isn't actually a D750, but because of the sticker, it is a D750. Basically, that camera is so old that we've already had to send it back. But the reason I'm making this video is because a lot of people have said, should I get a Z6? Should I buy a D750? Should I buy a D500? Now, I do want to remind you that I've done a real-world review of each one of these cameras, so you can check those out at the links down below. You can also download sample RAW files to determine how those images look. So now, let's start looking at the specs and seeing which cameras get the check marks. First, let's start by talking about the age of these cameras. As we know, at the time of recording this, the Z6 has only been out for a matter of a week or two. The D500 is a little over 2 years, and at this point, the D750 is over 4 years old. So there's new technology and there's old technology, and I still want to help you figure out which one you should get if you're in the market for one of these today. So let's start with how many megapixels. The Z6 has 24.5 megapixel full frame BSI CMOS sensor, with the D500 coming in at a 20.9 megapixel DX format cropped CMOS sensor. The D750 has a 24.3 megapixel full frame CMOS sensor. So technology with sensors changes over the years, as we know. The newest sensor in the Z6 is the best sensor out of all three of these cameras sitting here. The D750 was a fantastic camera when it came out. It was the smallest and lightest full-frame DSLR that Nikon had ever made. It was an extremely versatile camera. Great camera back then. Maybe not so much today, but if you still have it, it's still a viable camera to use. The D500 is a cropped sensor camera. It's 20 megapixels, but it's DX, it's cropped. So in this case, the check mark is definitely going to the Z6. Moving on to the image processors, we have an Expeed 6, an Expeed 5, and an Expeed 4. So if you had to guess which one's gonna get the check mark, you'd go with the 4, right? Wrong. That gets an X. The check mark goes to Z6. One of the most important features that go into a camera is the ISO capability. So starting with the Z6, that one does 100 native to 51,200, expandable all the way up to 204,800. The D500 is 100 native all the way up to 51,200, expandable to the insane number of 1.64 million ISO, which is stupid, and the D750 is 100 native to 12,800, expandable up to 51,200. Now keep in mind that the D500, even though it has the same ISO capability of the Z6, that's a cropped sensor. It's not going to hold up as well as the Z6 will at the same ISOs. Now the D750, even though it tops out at 12,800, it's still a very clean and nice image that you're getting from it. But it's 4 years old at this point. It's really hard to give a check mark to this camera for pretty much anything at this point because it's so old. But let me just tell you, if you did pick up this camera today because you're looking for a full frame affordable camera, you will not go wrong with it. So I'm not saying your camera sucks if you own this, I'm just basing it off of what is in front of me. And at this point, the Z6 is getting another check mark because the ISO capability in it is going to be better than the other two right here. Moving on to lens mounts, which is important to mention now that we have a mirrorless camera sitting here with a new Z mount. The Z6 has a Z mount. The D500 F mount and the D750 has an F mount. But the Z6, you can get an F to Z adapter, which allows you to take your F lenses and adapt it to the Z6. So again, check mark to the Z6 for having the ability to do the Z mount, which is new, and use all of your older lenses. How many frames a second do you get with the Z6? You will get 12 frames a second in 12-bit RAW, 9 frames a second in 14-bit RAW, in high extended mode and 5.5 frames a second in normal high mode. Now, the D500 can do 10 frames a second because it really has just one mode, and the D750, for a 4-year-old camera doing 6.5 frames a second, really isn't that bad. Now, the D500 is fantastic at 10 frames a second, but keep in mind, it's a crop sensor camera, so to be able to do 9 frames a second in 14-bit uncompressed RAW, that is going to be better in the Z6. So check mark is going to the D750. No, it's not. I just wanted to make sure you're awake. Check mark. Z6. Let me cut in here real quick and say that this video is brought to you by Squarespace, which is what I personally use for jaredpolin.com. And if you're looking to build your own online portfolio, check out squarespace.com/FroKnowsPhoto, where you can get a 14-day free trial with no obligation. If you decide that it's for you, use the code FroKnowsPhoto at checkout to get 10% off your first order. Now let's jump back into the video. Moving on to focusing points. How many focusing points are in the Nikon Z6? Good question, Jared. Let me tell you that answer. There's 273 phase detect AF focusing points that go edge to edge on the Z6. What I mean by edge to edge is you can move your focusing points all the way to the top, all the way to the bottom, basically one box to the left from the edge and one box from the edge on the right. It covers the entire frame. That's what you get with a mirrorless camera. Now, moving on to the D500, you have a ton at 153, with 99 of them being cross-type, and you have 3D tracking. The D750 has 51 autofocusing points, with only 15 of them being cross-type, but you also have 3D tracking for autofocus. That is something that the Z6 does not have, is the ability to do 3D tracking. That comes in handy when you're shooting fast-moving subjects like airplanes, or trying to track birds where you want to focus on your composition and you want the camera's 3D tracking to track the bird as it's moving. So in this case, I'm going to give a check mark, the first one here, to a D500 over the D750 when it comes to focusing points, because on the D750, they're more clumped in the middle. Now, the D500s are spread out further because, keep in mind, it is a cropped sensor camera, so that's getting a check mark. But I do need to give another check mark because overall, I think that the Z6, well, it does have more focusing points, so definitely a check mark for more focusing points that reach all the way out to the edges. And I also think that the Z6's autofocus is better than both of these other two cameras right here, so that's why it's getting a check mark. Continuing on, we need to talk about the max shutter speeds that you can get with these cameras, as well as the type of shutters that are in the cameras. Let's start on the right this time. The D750 tops out at 1/4000th of a second. It also has a mechanical shutter and no ability to shoot with an electronic shutter. The D500 tops out at 1/8000th of a second with a mechanical shutter, and the Z6 has a mechanical shutter that tops out at 1/8000th of a second as well, but also an electronic shutter that tops out at 1/8000th of a second, meaning you can shoot in complete silence with this camera right here, which is the Z6, and that means the Z6 adds another check mark to the piggy bank. Now let's take a look at the viewfinders we're working with. The Z6 has a 3.69 million dot electronic viewfinder. Now you have optical viewfinders in both the D500 and the D750. So what that means is you are seeing exactly what the camera is seeing through the lens, because it is an SLR, single lens reflex, in this case digital. But with the Z6, when the camera's off, you can't see through it. But when the camera is on, that's when it activates the electronic viewfinder, and you can see exactly what the camera's seeing and get a live representation of your exact exposure. So you can see whether you're overexposed or underexposed right in front of your eyes. Also, if you're shooting video, you can shoot video while looking through the electronic viewfinder, where you can only shoot video when you are looking at the back of the screen on the D500. Now, I do want to let you know that I made a video that explains the differences between electronic viewfinders as well as the optical viewfinder, so you can see that link down below, or click up on the I button on the top right-hand side, and it will take you over to that video. So check mark is definitely going to the electronic viewfinder, viewfinder because the pros far outweigh the cons of an optical viewfinder. Moving on, let's talk about the buffer and the burst rate. How many images can you get in a row before you fill up the buffer? The Z6 will do 43 raw files in high extended. Now that's the one where it's 12 frames a second. Now in normal high mode at 5.5 frames a second, the buffer basically never fills. Now that's because of the fast memory card, which we'll talk about in the future in this video, but just keep that in mind. You're getting 43 of those shots in a row, or basically never filling the buffer when you're shooting at those 5.5 frames a second. Now the D500 will give you 29 14-bit raw files in a row, or 200 12-bit raw files. So you're basically not gonna outrun the camera if you're shooting 12-bit. Now 29 isn't bad at all, but keep in mind that is a DX camera, so it's a smaller file than what you're finding in the Z6. And finally, the D750 will give you 15 raw files in a row, which wasn't bad 4 years ago. So the check mark, even though you can get 200 raw files in a row with the D500, it's going to the Z6 because you won't outrun it even when you're shooting full frame because of the fast memory card readout. Before I jump into the video specs, I know this seems lopsided to the Z6, well, because it really is. But the reason I made this video is because a lot of people requested to hear what I had to say and compare these side by side based on the specs and my knowledge from using these cameras to do real-world reviews. So I know it's lopsided, but you guys asked for it, and I think it's worthwhile to continue on. So now let's look at the video features, starting with the Z6. Now we can do full-frame 4K video without pixel binning, oversampled from 6K. You can do 10-bit 422 with N-Log to an external recorder with a slight crop. Now with the D500, you can do 4K UHD video recording with a 1.5x crop up to 30 frames a second, which I'm pretty sure was one of the first cameras that could do 4K on Nikon's side. And then the D750 can do up to 1080p at 60 frames a second. Clearly, the Z6 is one of the best video-capable cameras on the market right now, but I also want to reiterate one thing about the D500. Even though it's a 1.5x crop, that's a 1.5x crop on top of the DX crop that you already had, so keep that in mind if you're using this to shoot video. Now, talking about video, we need to talk about autofocus, because neither of these two cameras do autofocus video. Even the D850 that we're filming this on right now doesn't allow you to do autofocus. Now, you can press the button and it can hunt and try to find what you're trying to find. Not very good. The Z6 has really good continuous autofocus that will follow your subjects, and that's why 14 check marks go to the Z6. I wanted to cut in here real quick and let you know that we just released 14 custom Lightroom presets. Check out the different looks you can get quickly by using presets like Black and White Boomify, Aquamarine, Sandlot, Color Boomify, Skittles, and more. Head on over to FroKnowsPhoto.com/presets to play with and purchase all 14 of these presets at 40% off for a limited time. Now let's jump back to the video. This is something new that we need to talk about with Nikons, and that's in-body stabilization. You have 5-axis in-body stabilization with the Z6. You do have 3-axis electronic VR in the D500, which is basically worthless, and you have no stabilization inside of the D750. So check mark, of course, again goes to the Z6. Moving on to Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and NFC capabilities, the Z6 goes ahead and gives you Wi-Fi, SnapBridge, and Bluetooth. The D500 gives you Wi-Fi, SnapBridge, and Bluetooth. And the D750 does none. So who gets the check mark this time? I gotta give 2 because you know what? Nobody gets a check mark. Nobody gets a check mark. Now let's talk about the screens on the back of these cameras. The Z6 has a 3.2-inch 2.1 million dot tilting touchscreen. The D500 has a 3.2-inch 2.36 million dot touchscreen, tilting as well. And the D750 has a 3.2-inch 1.23 million dot tilting LCD, which is not a touchscreen. It was one of those cameras where you're like, I want to touch you, and it's like, you can't touch me, or you can't touch this. It's a good one right there. Now, do you think the D500 has a better screen because it has higher resolution. I always found that the D500 screen was on par with my top of the line D5, which means it's probably on par with the D850, which is really good as well. So in this case, I think I gotta go with higher resolution on the D500 and give it a check mark. Wow. Now we're moving on to memory card slots. This one's gonna be interesting. The Z6 has one XQD card slot. One slot to rule them. Nope, can't say one slot to rule them all. It just has one slot. The D500 has two card slots. One XQD card slot and one SD slot. Now, I wish it had two XQD card slots, but at least it has two card slots, unlike the Z6. And the D750 has two SD card slots. In this case, the Z6 is not getting a check mark. You don't get a check mark. You will not get a check mark for your one stupid memory card. The D500, though, is going to take the cake on this one, so it's going to get a cake with a check mark. Now let's take a look at the batteries that we will find in these cameras, starting with the Z6. There's an ENEL15B battery with the ability to do USB charging only when the camera is off. So that's a nice feature. I don't think I'll ever use it, but it's in there. The D500 uses an ENEL15A battery, and the same battery is used inside the D750. Now, in my real-world usage of these cameras, I think you're gonna get more battery life out of both the D500 and the D750 because this is an electronic viewfinder camera. It's mirrorless, so it's going to use more battery power. With that being said, I've squeezed out over 700 shots on a battery charge in the Z6, but I still think you're gonna get better battery life just because these are DSLRs and they don't have all of the mirrorless features to waste battery power. So in this case, double check mark to these two. Since we just talked about batteries, why don't we talk about battery grips, aka vertical grips? The Z6, yeah, no, you're not getting a vertical grip that has functionality beyond just extra battery life. And at the time of recording this, it's not even available on the market because it's still part of a development announcement. It is absolutely stupid. I've told Nikon personally that that is one of the dumbest things you've ever done, is not come out with a grip for a professional freaking camera. You can get a battery grip for the D500, you can get a battery grip for the D750, and this time I'm giving just one check mark. You know why? Because the D750 needs some love, so the D750 alone is getting a check mark, because you know it's full frame. If you're looking to purchase any of these cameras right here, or any camera gear for that matter, go on over to adorama.com/fro, because when you use that link, it helps us to continue making the free content that we make. Moving on to one of the most important tests of all, the wind tunnel test. Clear winner, clear winner. This one's not even close. This one's not even close because the Z6 is so dainty, so small, and so tiny, and so light that it just wins the wind tunnel test because it's almost like it's not there. Check mark, spinning like a tornado to the Z6. Since I just mentioned the weights, let's talk about the weights of these cameras. The Z6 comes in at 1.29 pounds, which is 585 grams. The D500 comes in at 1.89 pounds. It's a fat little boy at 860 grams. And the D750 is a little boy at 1.65 pounds or 750 grams. But if you're looking for the fattest camera, then the check mark would go to the D500, but don't put it up because that doesn't matter. It's about the lightest camera in this case. In the Z6, you get the check mark. Now it's time for the second most important test, and that, everybody say it with me, is the sniff test. Yay! D750 smells like don't buy it. D500 smells like somebody who just worked out at a gym, or that's just, actually I just smelled myself. And then, oh my God, the Z6 smells like a dream. It's like a cloud with rainbows and butterflies. It just smells so much better. Check mark Z6. Now that takes us up to the prices. Let's look at the prices because this is important. The Z6 comes in at $2,146.95 with the adapter at the time of recording this. So you can get it body only for just under $2,000. That's a tremendous price. The D500 comes in at $1,896.95, but for the holidays, it was $100 off at $1,796.95, and the D750 is still priced at $1,996.95, even though during the holidays, it was on sale for $1,396.95. Prices are pretty close. Of course, if money is no object, you could just decide to go with the most expensive, but let's just look at it. If you leave price out of it, I'm buying a Z6 all day long over both of these cameras. Even though I own this D500, this was a cool camera when it came out because it was fast shooting pro camera at 10 frames a second in DX mode that shot 4K video. It was a fantastic little camera. It's still a good camera now, but at the price points for $100 or $200 more to go with a Z6 with all of its capabilities, all of its functions, and its ability to take F-mount lenses, you gotta go with a Z6. And a D750 at $1,300? If you can get one for around $1,300 or under $1,000 used and you're just getting into the full frame game, then by all means, go ahead and pick one of those up. But don't pick it up if you think you're gonna shoot a ton of video. It may not be the right option for you, but if you wanna get into the Nikon full frame game for pretty cheap, the D750 is for you. I can't even recommend the D500 at this point, honestly, because I think the Z6 just blows it out of the water. So again, if you haven't checked out the real world reviews where I used each and every one of these cameras sitting right here, you can click the links down below. You could also download raw files. If you'd like to see other comparison videos, please leave some comments down below. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe, because when you subscribe and hit that bell button, it notifies you when new videos go live. So I hope you enjoyed this video and found it informative, and that's where I'm gonna leave it. Jared Polin, FroKnowsPhoto.com. See ya.